Professor Paula Banerjee, IDRC Chair and Founding Director of the Center of Gender and Forced Displacement at Asian Institute of Technology, Bangkok. She was also the first Vice Chancellor of Sanskrit University, and we are extremely grateful that she has consented to come to our college and address this gathering. On behalf of all of us at Bethune College, I welcome all our esteemed guests, teachers from different colleges and universities, like from Presidency College University, and all our students, all my colleagues. So once again, a very warm welcome to Professor Paula Banerjee, and she will be speaking on sex workers, migrant citizens, the making of Kallolini, Kolkata. And the very name Kallolini, Kolkata evokes a kind of thrill in all of us. So let's look forward to a very, very interesting and intriguing session. And thank you, Madam, for being with us today. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Anushila-di. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll first introduce our very esteemed speaker that we have here today. Professor Paula Banerjee is the IDRC Chair and Founding Director of the Center of Gender and Forced Displacement at the Asian Institute of Technology, Bangkok. Earlier, she was the Dean of Arts, University of Calcutta, and Vice Chancellor of the Sanskrit College and University. She supervised 32 departments and 10 research centers. She also served as President of the International Association for Study of Forced Migration. She served as the Honorary Director of Calcutta Research Group and is currently associated with this institute as one of the members of its governing body. She has a long research and publication record on gender and displacement in both South and Southeast Asia. Professor Banerjee is the editor of Borders, Histories, Existences, Gender and Beyond, and the co-editor of Women in Indian Borderlands. More recently, her work has focused on gender, race, and other vulnerabilities in the context of pandemics, cities, and urban history. One or two words about the lecture today. Here, it's kind of a coincidence that before I came here, I was taking a class with the UG semester 6, and we are doing this short story by Manik Bandyopadhyay called The Final Solution, Upay, which talks about migrant families, particularly one migrant woman. And before that, we also did Binodini, and I was quite stoked to find that Paula Di is going to address Binodini a little, because sex workers are included in the lecture. So we were talking about Jobot Dakhul colonies and Patal Pradesh and all of that. So Mollika from Bandyopadhyay's story, whose journey isn't about crossing borders, but crossing impossible moral lines drawn by a society that offers her very few alternatives. And these women were, in the truest sense, the refuse, a term that was used for migrants that literally means darning, mending lives torn apart by this extraordinary event of partition, or with whatever tools they had available. And their stories also echo the story of Binodini, the brilliant performer who filled theaters with admirers, yet was denied ownership of a stage in her own name, or the educated refugee women who, having sacrificed marriage to become family breadwinners, found themselves invisible in a society that couldn't reconcile female independence with respect. So these women, sex workers, migrants, breadwinners, they built Kolkata from its margins. They belonged to the city that simultaneously rejected them. Their bodies and labor became the invisible architecture of Kallolini, Kolkata, always essential, yet never fully embraced as citizens of the city they helped create. So today we'll listen to these stories. Over to you, Paula Di.
Thank you. Big thank you to Bethune College. Bethune College should actually, boycott me. I'll tell you why. Because when I was the Dean of Arts of Calcutta University, this is the only college where I did not visit. So it should. There is a very good reason for that. Because it was being run so well. So why should I visit? and why waste people's time? So that's why, you can boycott me, but I'm glad that you did not. The great thing about Bethune College is that it always grabs on things which are different, which are new. So Shramata will be able to tell you what a harrowing time they had. They didn't tell me that, but I figured about organizing my lecture in a college. NGOs were very happy, but colleges were like, sex worker niye bolben? আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে একটু ভেবে দেখি যেন তারা আর কি as if I'm going to talk of erotica. I might, who knows, but I am not at all dependable as a character, and probably that will engage the audience as well. But today actually what I'm going to talk about is the city and why sex workers, concubines, baigees, and people who are in that gray zone. Because, Noti Binodini was a baiji, was a sex worker, was a, stage actress. She was the most famous personality. She was a writer, she was an interpreter, she was many things. She was a philosopher, And the great thing about working on these issues is that you also get a chance to reinterpret the archive. I worked a lot in the state archives for this particular paper, and I also worked in the police archives because, of course, police archives are very essential because associated with this particular issue is the issue of crime. You cannot leave that behind. This is actually a project where I'm looking at 3 groups which are distinct but yet overlapping. The overall project is a gaze at sex workers, at domestic workers, at care workers. And all of these are interchangeable. I will talk a little bit about this interchangeability, but not a lot, because it is just 40 minutes and we have to sort of, our teachers have always told us, focused, Rakho, be very focused. So I will try to be a little focused, but as a person, I'm very undisciplined. So I keep going through all the paths and meander. Okay. So, yes, at any point of time, if you find it problematic, raise your hand and I will respond. Because there is no stupid question, according to me. My answers can be proverbially stupid, though. So I take that, right to be completely stupid, but you're never going to be stupid, so ask your questions. Okay, so, because, I am here for a few days. I've been teaching all my life, and the fun part is the interaction. Because if I want to see Barbie dolls, I'll see that stupid movie anyway. So, that's not what I want to do. I want to discuss things with you, and I want to learn from you. So at any point, please stop me. I will start with something, change the slide, please. This is that, the previous picture was that of Miss Shephali. I will talk a little bit about her, but later. This is, of course, we know who she is, Noti Binodini, and I will start with a very typical trope that she uses when she began her Amar Kotha. Iha kebol obhagini hridoy jalar chhaya, prithibite amar kichui nai, shudhu ananto nirasha, shudhui দুঃসময়ের প্রাণের কাতরতা, কিন্তু তাহা শুনিবারও লোক নাই, মনে রাখার জানাইবার লোক জগতে নাই, কেননা আমি জগৎ মাঝে কলঙ্কিনী পতিতা. Now, you will always say, I know people like Jishnu will say, but Paula-ji, that is a trope. Did she really mean it? The translation here is done by my very brilliant sister, and she did it in sort of a couple of minutes time when I was just writing it up yesterday, and I told her, please translate, and she did it. This is merely the shadow of a charred soul of the most unfortunate being. I have no one in this entire world, only endless hopelessness. All I have is sadness wrapped in my heart's discontent. But I don't even have anyone to listen to my story. I don't, because I'm a sullied person in this world called a putita. I have no family, friends, society. In fact, in the world, I have no one to call my own. Be that, may, that it is just a trope, But why is that trope necessary? Why does it fall into a pattern? Why is it expected of somebody like Binodini to begin her treatise by saying, Amar lekhaয়, amar introduction ta ki, amar জীবনটাই তো এরকম. So, that is something that makes us think. However, that doesn't pertain very centrally to what I'm going to say today, but that has some sort of resonance with my argument. I will give a broad sweep of the history of sex work, and I will call it sex work, okay, because ideologically that's what I believe, in the city of Kolkata. And this is from the early colonial period to until the mayhem that was named HIV. It was before this pandemic, the initial pandemic that we lived through in our lives. So I will stop my narrative there. So, why do I connect it to public health issues? Because sex work in our rhetoric, in our discourse, have been not a standalone issue. It has been interchangeable with a number of issues. One of the interchangeability is with the issue of migration. Most of the sex workers living in Kolkata, even today, Durbar says it is about 15,000 sex workers. My calculation is a lot more. Durbar also says in the state of West Bengal there are 5 lakh sex workers, but that was a dated sort of a statistics. But anyway, so we are really talking about a large group of women. And the sex workers are not just sex workers. We have sex workers in the brothels, we have flying sex workers, we have people who moonlight, we have people who are students who get into it. There are all classes of it, and the money quotient is also very different among different groups. So it is a very varied topography that we are talking about. And I think it is a semantic to say that sex work is one of the very essential professions in any city. Whenever we talk about sex workers, we often bring in a lot of emotions. We bring in questions of rights, which is very valid. But what we fail to lose sight of is that this is also a transaction. And people who are transacting with their bodies are people who do not have any other capital to transact with. So the capital is their body. So there is a reason why, all of these questions of human rights, vulnerability, all of these come into this discourse. And also why, theater was sullied, because it was informed by the lives of sex workers. They were the first actors in it. Why a lot of these professions, for example, domestic workers, even today, during the pandemic, domestic workers were in very difficult situation. Many of them, when they were underage, like 15, 16, 17, were married off to the highest bidder because parents did not have the money to provide the dowry for them. And many of them who were in the lower rungs of that pole ended up by being sex workers. So, even care workers, these are interchangeable professions. These are considered as feminine professions. Though sex work is never only women doing it or being the clients or whatever, but largely women are the providers of it and men are the consumers of it. So if we look at the topography of the city, we say that sex work or brothels have been a constant companion to the city. What we do not talk about is that it is never something within the cityscape. It is not in people's imagination. Have you ever heard a policymaker saying that we have to modernize the brothels? We have to make sure these people have a lifestyle where they can survive without being endangered by pandemics, by public health issues. We have to provide them with vaccines. We never talk about that. It is never in a city's discourse or imagination, yet it is very much there. And it is also one of the things that expands the city. So Shumantoda wrote about this, that he, in one of his books, wrote that prostitution underwent a dramatic change in Bengal soon after the British took over. Why? I will come to that. And he also talked about that the tensions over colonial prostitution is also to do with this modern cityscape. The modern city, as conceived by the 19th century engineers and architects, was the embodiment of order, an expression of human intellect. The dominance of, of the rationale, the male spirit, the rational spirit, it was a very masculine sort of a trope for city making. But absolutely opposite to that is the femininity that exists in the city through these jobs. And that is symbolic of disorder and chaos. So women's ability to be the giver, the provider of something which is very necessary, and the reason why, I could just talk about post-independence India, but the reason why I will talk about a little bit of the colonial period, not only because, I want to show off that I've done archival research, that might be one of the things, but because I knew people like Jishnu will be here who would be only impressed by such things. But apart from that, it is also to argue that sex workers were actually encouraged to be sex workers. Sex workers were there, because they served a certain purpose. One of the main reasons is that, when the barracks came in, before the cantonments also there were sex workers. But the cantonment brought sex workers and made it possible for them to be, centralized within the city's scape. And one of the reasons why, you keep changing, okay, I'm not noticing it, so you know. So one of the reasons why, in the cantonments, it was very important to have sex workers, was because in the 1793 Cornwallis's treaties, there was this argument that nobody with a mixed race could become an officer in either the company or in the British government dealings with the city. So what are people going to do? Before this, there was, we all know that Job Charnock had a concubine or a wife. There is an argument in that discussion. But the thing is, before that, many of the men, the European men, took Indian wives because, they left their wives and they were encouraged to leave their wives back home. Because the British knew that, if the European wives came to India, they were considered in the Victorian period, as you know, very frail, the nerves were never strong, and they were considered as people who would not be able to take the heat. So it was more important that these people form alliances with a single woman or two or three who would be theirs, okay? And so, this commodification of women who would serve them, and often there are a number of writings where the medical board says that the men who marries Indian women or has relationship with them are always better looked after, they are better served, and they perform better, because those who go to the brothels often have the VD. So the VD was the most important thing at that point of time. And this became particularly crucial because the VD, after 1857, added a layer of meaning, because that was the first time when the British were bodily challenged. So it was important for the European bodies should be strong, should be virile, should be dominating. And yet thousands, practically thousands of British men were falling prey to the Wheaties, you know. And it's interesting how the discourse keep turning up. If you look at the archival reports, you will see people saying that, you know, these men are constantly going to the prostitutes. And that is from where they are. So it's the women who are providing sex who are also bringing in these contaminants. I have seen the same sort of narrative in Northeast India. The government of India is saying that, like in places like Nagaland and all, wherever the army is stationed, they are contracting HIV, they contracted coronavirus from the men, from the women who were providing them with sex. Because the whole masculine trope is that they need sex. They need to be serviced, just the way they need good food, pure food, they need purity in their physical relationships as well. And that is why the Cantonment Act came in 1864, and then you have the Contagious Disease, you know, Act. That's very famous by now. I think the first one was 1868 in India, not in England. England it was before. And so, you know, that was never an effort to stop sex work. That was always an effort to control it, to dominate it, to make sure that these women are controlled by the by the administration, because they were in close contact with the British Army. Okay, so this is my first argument, that sex work in the colonial period was encouraged, but there was efforts to control it. And in this whole sexual relationship, what was controlled was women's sexuality, women's body, because most of the administration and most of the administrative reforms are done by men. At least at that time, definitely now, even now the overwhelming number of people doing it are men. Whether they're informed by feminist thinking is something which is very debatable. And that is why, you know, the focus of control is always women's sexuality. The women are the wrongdoers. The women need the control. And that trope, therefore, percolated through all male-female relationships throughout the city. You know, I'll come to that in present day. It's very interesting how that trope, you know, comes when in the post-independence period, not present day, in post-independence period. So you have the venereal diseases, the Contagious Disease Acts, and then you have the lock hospitals. Today, you know, rather than going into Philip Aludin's theory and this person's theory and that person's theory, I will just give you stories so that you have certain interesting narratives in your head when you think about it. So when the lock hospitals were built, the interesting thing was it was always built in the peripheries. However, you know, the people afflicted by the disease are in the center. But, you know, and also there were different lock hospitals for, you know, the soldiers and the sex workers. And again, the other interesting thing is there was a lock hospital planned in Baliganj. Now the question went up to the Governor General, where the Governor General said, oh my God, no, no, no. In this beautiful area, you cannot have a lock hospital. So, you know, everything, that is why I would say this work, this very feminine work, becomes the archetype of what Gramsci had called the Southern question. Because the dirt that was associated with it was always very palpable. This was dirty. But it was dirty, yet it was something that was necessary. Not only was it necessary, it was also to be not stopped. I'm not saying that you will officially encourage it. Officially, you can't do that. But you cannot stop it because that would not be accepted by the clients. These, you know, sex workers, brothels, etc., is this whole notion of migrants who were coming in, and they were very much present in this group of people. I'll tell you how we know that. The interesting part was, there was, because of these acts, enormous data collected on sex workers. For example, and this is, I'm bringing my story to the late, 1890s and then 1901 and later. There, at the end of the century, and then again we will see the same things in data from 1921 onwards, census data and all of that, and how that changed. I will also mention it. It was very interesting, where they talked about, there are, at the beginning of the year, I think this was 1897, if I'm not mistaken, that at the beginning of the year, there were 8,291, and I'm pretty sure that's the number, sex workers in the city. But then, over the next month, 772 sex workers either left or died. Where did they leave? Nobody knows that. And these were considered as the migrant women, because they were the women who came to the city from places like Munger. There's a very famous case where 4 teenage women from Munger had come, and where there was an effort to stop these minor women from sex work. But the whole question was, then what is to be done with them? They're in the city for work. If we don't provide them with the money, then what is to be done with these women? Then there was a special statistics on Midnapur. Midnapur was close to Kolkata. So Midnapur, it was always considered that Midnapur is providing with these sex workers in large numbers. The migration from there is huge. And that statistic said that with a population of over 5 million people, and with only 5 lakh people, and with only 103 lakh women married, people needed huge groups of sex workers. Many of them were coming from Midnapur. 1 out of every 3 migrant women worker, were actually involved in sex work. But by the early 1900s, after 1921, it was very difficult to find out how many were working. Because from 1901 census onwards, these women were placed with the vagrants, with the criminals, and with the non-productive sections of the society. But they were very much within the productive sections of this, sections of the society. They earned a lot of money. Now, this association was also, this creamy layer of sex workers were also people like Binodini Dashi or Tinkuri Dashi. So these women had gone to the stage. They were in the theater, and they did amass quite a bit of wealth, not all of them. Tinkuri Dashi, for example, was particularly wealthy. So there were many women who were particularly wealthy, but there were others who were not. So in this transaction, there were many who amassed a certain amount of money, and there were many who did not. So it was a variegated field. It was not as if there was homogeneity in it. So that is the picture of sex work and city that we are drawing. Then again, when Central Avenue was built, what was one of the considerations to design Central Avenue? One of the main considerations was the road has to go through areas where there are brothels to break them. So that, just like partition of Bengal, so that you can bring them under control. So Shonagachi, Rambagan, Bowbajar, all these, Shetbagan, all these areas were sort of, broken up, and the brothels became dispersed in this area. Many women had to leave. Again, I told you, they were migrants, and there was this constant disconcert that, oh my goodness, when these women leave, they never come back to the same area. Oh, these migrant women are so difficult to control. You never know where they are going, you know. So migration was another way of subversion for women. They would leave because, after all, the treatment to them was pretty insulting and pretty problematic. And this did not only happen to sex workers. It happened to many, many women who were not sex workers but belonged to the poorer section of the family. And so poverty was related to sex work. People understood poverty is one of the root causes. So poorer women were at risk. There are, stories about, for example, this woman called Atur Kaur, who belonged to a very poor section, and she was forced to register as a prostitute. So she took to the courts and said that she's not a prostitute. But the person, the police officer, the in charge who was there, who said, I never take, write down my interviews with these women because I'm so used to it by now that I just talk to them and I know. And I spoke to this woman, I have absolutely no suspicion that she wasn't a sex worker. So I say she's a sex worker, but this woman went on saying, no, I just live in the quarters because I have a husband, etc. And this also appeared in many, literary works, in the narratives where, where women who are getting into the job slowly were looked with a lot of suspicion. And then all of you know, partition happened. And, when partition happened, there was a huge influx of women, single women. Sarojini Naidu College for Women was the first college for women migrants, or women who came from the west and east side of India into the city. And Sarojini Naidu College was supposed to serve them. And I know about this particularly because I taught there. That is where I started my career from. So Sarojini Naidu College for Women was a place which was formed by women, and all these migrant women, therefore, changed the conception of Bhadra Mahila. Remember Meghe the character Nita, I think. And for example, she was from a solidly middle class background, poor but a solidly middle class background. Remember her consternation with her slippers when it broke, how she handled it. But within, that span of 20 years or 10 years, that changed. Because when her sister at the end of the film was shown to have her broken slippers, she just took it under her arms and started walking. So there were these subtle changes happening. Women were looking at things differently. Women were performing roles that they never performed, and they were putting people into a disarray because nobody was prepared for what was happening. Where women were coming from, how were they taking over the public space. They were not. If you look at the numbers, they were not. It took a while. But, there were people who were our predecessors, and they appeared to be taking over the public space. So the most important thing in the post-colonial period, or maybe decolonizing period, is this effort to modernize. And one of these efforts for modernization was to bring back the so-called purity. And how do you bring back the purity? Of course, you make sure that much of what is done under prostitution is made into a crime. Before, during the nationalist period, there were police records where they said, okay, these places are crime prone. Why? Because they were giving shelters to the nationalists, or they were giving shelters to the communal leaders, or whatever. Now, they became the criminals. So the sex workers themselves were changed. Their personality, their symbolism was clear that they were, under the colonial period, they were never, ever, sex work was never ruled out. There was a lot of discussion about morality. The Bishop of Kolkata wrote a letter to, the Governor General that this needs to be stopped, and also the Jewish community leaders wrote a letter that Jewish girls are being dragged into sex work, but it was not stopped. But in the post-colonial period, the first change was there were aspects of it which were completely criminalized. So from harbingers of crime, these sex workers were becoming criminals themselves. Okay, so that was how modernization impacted on the city. The other interesting thing was when you make women, when you criminalize sex workers, they will not leave the job, but they will go to the periphery. And there, the peripheries attracted clients, and that also in certain ways spread the city. And people were really concerned because they were providing important economic service. They always paid the rent. They were good clients of many, vendors. So, all of these sort of impacted on that. But the great thing about the colonial period is that you have archives to go to. It's easy. But in the post-colonial period, there are very little archives in sex work. So you have to create your own archives. So that way, this particular project, to me it was not a project, it was a love's labor, was something where I reinterpreted the archives. People's diaries were part of the archives. These are the archives I consulted, the personal archives, okay? And so, as a result, সময় কি দেরি হয়ে যাচ্ছে দেখো তো কতক্ষণ 5 মিনিট 20 minutes 3টা বাজে কিন্তু আমি তো বলে যেতে পারবো অর্ডার করে না. So what was happening was that there was an effort to reformulate the society. And there was an effort to reformulate the society without taking into consideration the sex workers, So sex workers are to be subsumed under that dark layer. You're not going to talk about them. Look at the census and see if you can find the sex workers there. So for many, symbolically, in many of these areas, sex workers were continuously erased. The brothels were erased. People knew where they existed. It was, have you guys seen, in my generation, that was a very interesting movie called A Few Good Men. If you haven't, watch it. It's a very interesting movie. There, one of the guys who died was given red alert or something like that, where he was beaten up by his entire group of people there, his colleagues, and he died as a result of that. And when, the person who was in charge of that battalion came to the discussion, so he said, that doesn't exist in the code of law. And then the lawyer argued that, okay, that doesn't exist in the code of law, but that happens. And as a result, he told one of the guys who was supposed to have given this beating that, is the lunch or the mess for soldiers in the code of law? He said, no, sir. He said, so you've never had food for this entire time? He said, no, sir, we had 3 square meals a day. He said, so how could you have it when it's not in the code? So they said, we knew about it. So that is how society operates. You knew about it. You don't have to have it in the code of law. The brothels were there, and Prince and Pauper were visiting that brothel. So, when you look at Kolkata Kamalaloy or Hutum or Nabobabu Bilash, there you will see who is a babu? A babu is a person who spends money on parties, on garden parties, on keeping concubines, on eating good food. To me, the most interesting thing is on speaking in a language which is not understood by either the British or the Bengalis. So I think that part of Babu Bibi still exists a little bit amongst us. So that was, part of that. But now you don't have a Nabu Babu Bilash. Okay, so you don't publicly acknowledge that. Yet we know they exist. In all strata they exist. Films are made out of them. There are novels on them. They are in the popular culture. Thank you so much. So, দেখো কি ভালো লাগে এখানে বেথুন কলেজে চালিয়েছে বড় সুন্দর. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is there was a force to drive these things underground. I have students who worked in Sonagachi on projects under the sort of tutelage of the government of West Bengal. And I have myself also worked, but I worked there as a student. Now, I don't really go there, but my students go, and they were describing it to me, that is not visible in Hiramandi. If you look at Hiramandi, you will not find that picture. But that picture is that of tremendous impoverishment, of squalor, of dirt. So, you know, it wasn't dirty, but it became dirty. That is what the expectation is, that the transition has to go. After all, Kolkata is a southern city. So, you know, while all of these was going on, suddenly a woman comes in the 70s to the Bengali stage, not the stage, the bars. And her name is Miss Shefali. So she came to dominate the cabarets in the city. Miss Shefali also has her own autobiography written, not as famous as Amar Kotha, but there she has spoken about how she came from tremendous impoverishment, and yet, you know, when she came, overnight, at the age of 14, she talked about how, for the Bengali, because hitherto, who were the cabaret dancers? Who were the crooners? The Anglo-Indian women, the outsiders, the so-called outsiders. Shefali made it a central problem. People were shocked to realize it's a Bengali girl who was doing this, who was doing the cabaret. The half, you know, that is why, you know, for us, the Gujarat riots were such an eye-opener. It used to happen in Northeast, it used to happen in Kashmir. These were the peripheries. But in the center, something like this happening, it's the same trope. She overtook the center, the cabaret that she overtook, then Usha took Trinkas. You know, so these were places of power for these groups of people. And they completely changed the symbolism of the city itself, because now you had to reckon with Bengali women having the courage to appear, you know, in skimpy dresses, as she said, and dominate the audience. How many Bengali women, you know, that is why Mamata Banerjee is an exception. I'm not talking of her politics. You might like her, you might dislike her, but she dominates her audience. That is something that we have to agree. How many Bengali women has the courage to dominate the audience? You know, Shefali did dominate the audience. When she was 14-year-old, she started that domination. So you see, that was a direct turnover from the usual sex worker trope where Binodini talks about Ami Abhagini, you know. From there to Shefali, who said, I loved drinking alcohol, I loved smoking, I attended parties. I'm not saying that you have to follow that trope. That is not what I'm encouraging. What I'm saying is have the courage to change the society. And that courage might not sort of, you know, give you the name of being a very good girl, but the point is you're not here to be Miss Congeniality. So be a little bit undisciplined there. That is my message. So having said that, I will tell you something, you know, then, you know, slowly we have the HIV. And every pandemic, whether it's HIV, whether it's coronavirus, every pandemic has the effect of bringing in an onslaught to women's independence, women's autonomy, women's courage to define themselves. Because immediately during the HIV, you have, you know, discussions where, again, the whole notion of sexual chastity is percolated through society, where what is to be controlled is women's sexuality. Okay? Don't be a loose woman. Interestingly, when around that time in the 70s, there were, you know, documents which talked about venereal diseases. And it was very funny because this document was from Kolkata, and more than 1,000 prostitutes sex workers had venereal diseases. But more than 6,000 housewives had venereal diseases. So where did they get from? So you see, there were new lenses coming up. And this, I think, is particularly important today because in 2023, there are new trafficking, there are new reports of trafficking, there are new treaties coming in where, you know, again, there's an effort to control women's autonomy, women's right over their sexuality. So I think, and this is worldwide. What is more scary is this is worldwide. I have to end with my pet peeve, and that is Donald Trump. I think he's a complete, don't laugh, he's very harmful. We are laughing, we are making him, he's a buffoon. But what he stands for, what he legitimizes is something extremely heinous. So, you know, this backlash is something that makes what I'm discussing today particularly timely. It is important to counteract this. And when you today, we all know, those of us who are working, my young friend here, Poshali, works with Sappho, all of us, many of us here are working with groups. An attack on women's sexuality does not support men's sexuality. We have to go back to what Rokeya said, and that is, গাড়ি চারটি চাকা, তার মধ্যে দুটি পুরুষ দুটি নারী। এখন আমরা হয়তো সেখানে বলবো একটি পুরুষ, একটি অন্য কমিউনিটির, একটি ট্রান্সজেন্ডার, একটি ওই, একটু সেই, কিন্তু that will increase the complexity. It doesn't reduce it. And when you attack one group, you actually end up attacking the society, end up the functions of the society, end up attacking the performance, and end up harming the society. So we need to introspect that. So when mothers tell people that, you know, don't tell women, don't go out at 11 o'clock at night, I think the question would be, why cannot we manage cities at 11 o'clock at night? So I was very, very happy that all these young women sitting in the front row were in the night vigil a couple of months back, but this whole thing, anyway, I have a critique of that as well, but that my nature is to critique because I'm in the academe. What do we do other than criticize? Otherwise we won't be earning any money. So I put money by making critical, you know, statements. However, never compromise on curbing of your rights. That's the only thing that I can convey to you. Thank you so much. এবারে আমি বসি, হ্যাঁ, ঘোড়া মানুষ বেশিক্ষণ দাঁড়াতে পারছে না।
So we've had a very crucial, very, very necessary lecture here. A lecture that examined the overlooked roles of marginal women who have shaped Calcutta's urban identity. Very interesting stories, lovely narratives. I would want some questions, interactions. Let's see. Okay. Yes, Shreya.
Yeah, I am doing my PhD from SU. So my question is, you briefly talked about the non-productive sex of the city. So can you enlighten a bit about it, because it's part of my project. So.
SU also called me for a lecture.
She's right there. Go and ask her.
Okay, so the mic, please.
I'm Purna, I'm your sister, as you know. So I don't need introduction, but I'm from Presidency University. In fact, when I was writing it down, I wrote the university down first. The presidency part I added later. So I wrote university, and then I was like, there is no way I can write University of Presidency. University of Kolkata I can write, but I don't teach in University of Kolkata. But anyway.
University of Kolkata you can't write. The name is University of Calcutta.
Calcutta. Okay. So anyway, I had, I had to scribble presidency later, as you will see when you, if anyone opens the roster, they will see that presidency was written later as an afterthought. So anyway, my first question to you, that is my only question, is how do you, when you spoke of the 19th century idea of womanhood, you talked about, giving the angel in the house, pretty much. But that wasn't the only, model, that subjectivity that you had in the 19th century. There was a whole, there still is, there's a whole repertoire, a whole, sequence of femininity, idea of femininity. So how do you account for the other ideas of femininity in this whole narrative that you presented? Especially the new woman that came at the end. And how do you not, why isn't Binodini or any other Miss Shephali not a new woman?
Any other questions? Comments?
Now for nothing call.
Thank you, Paula di. অনেকদিন পরে তোমার সঙ্গে দেখা হলো, and it was wonderful listening to you. তো মানে brilliant. কিন্তু তাও অনেক প্রশ্নটা আছে। তো আমি I was particularly interested in the way you talked about Kolkata and migration to Kolkata. So actually I myself have looked into prostitution. I've used the word prostitution in my own writings. I should not, but I have used it. So I've noticed that a large number of women came to Kolkata from the suburbs, from distant villages. They came with their lovers, right? I mean, they eloped with their lovers, and they lived with their partners in these brothels. Like in Binodini Dasi's Amar Kotha, you'll see that she's referred to a couple who had rented her grandmother's house. So lots of these living couples who were non-marital couples who were living outside marriage, they were residing in these brothels, and eventually most of them, they separated, and these women actually were abandoned by their lovers. I mean, that's what my findings indicate. And they eventually, became prostitutes. So there was, romance played an important factor. I would like to emphasize that. And another thing, many of them were actually trafficked. How would you differentiate between trafficking and migration? Because many of them were just duped. There were some women or men acting as go-betweens between these brothel keepers and these women, very, very young, vulnerable women, who easily trusted the men or women they were in contact with. And we find this trope in films, like in Nishipol. So there was an elderly man in this woman's locality who promised that he'd give her a job in the city. So she comes to the city with this man and then finds herself in a brothel. So this is a common thing that was happening right through the 19th century, and I think through the partition and the post-colonial, post-independence decades as well. So this is a very common and recurrent theme in fiction and films, and I think this is also attested by the different surveys that were conducted in the 19th century. One by Bankim Chandra herself, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, as a district magistrate of Murshidabad, had conducted a study, and then there were reports published in newspapers like Anandabajar Potrika, and all. So Shumanta Bandyopadhyay has referred to one or two of them. So these studies do indicate that, many of them were actually duped by people whom they had trusted. So what do you call this migration?
There's one question there. Anjana.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Momita Bhattacharjee from UG Semester 6, Bethune College. Ma'am, at the very beginning of the seminar, you told us that this whole illegally legal or legally illegal industry of sex working is divided into multiple forms, including multiple genders. And that reminded me of a report I read in this journal published by Youth Ki Awaaz many years ago, where it talked about this transgender sex worker named, I think, Shuchi Bagui. Very ironic, her name is Shuchi. She was brutally abused and mutilated, and when she went to lodge her report to the police told her what was there to rape. And on being asked about her history, how she entered this world of sex work, she told that she identifies herself with the pronoun she. She told the reporters that she was born as a man, her parents told her so, and one fine morning her customer on her bed told her that she's a woman, and she became a woman. And from there I got to know that the history of transgender sex workers existed back to the time of migration and partition. So if you could enlighten us a little bit of that, because you clearly made it clear that the coerced inclusion of these triply marginalized women were mostly based upon poverty, migration, and definitely gender, while it was very definite for the transgender sex workers, where this whole inversion of sex and gender was included. So if you could enlighten us a little bit of that, their level of marginalization, their history, and how they have progressed.
One more question there. Can I pose a question? Anjana had a question.
There are 3 more people with questions.
আমি একটু বলে নিই, তারপরে আবার শুনবো, হ্যাঁ, না হলে সব ভুলে যাব, বয়স হচ্ছে তো। Okay, non-productive sector of the city. Just because the state defines you as non-productive does not make you non-productive. Non-productive is a terminology that was used to give you a certain kind of, production is something that gives you legitimacy. So this is more or less the sector that was considered as illegitimate, So non-productive in economic, that's why I said that, in fact, my student, Ari Baskoro, I don't know where he is, he did the slides for me. Yesterday I had a discussion with him and he did the slides for me. So thank you to Ari Baskoro. But he particularly understands economics better than I do. So he made 2 slides on the economic aspects of sex work, both in the colonial period as well as in the modern period. Vagrants are considered as non-productive, but who are these vagrants? So there are multiple layers of it, and if you are working, that is a very good thing that you're doing, because I haven't heard of anybody working on non-productive sector of society in Bengal as yet. So this is a very new topic. If you're working with Chamota, you're with the right person, I can tell you this much. Subarna. Okay, again a right person, and we can have a discussion on that. But there's a lot to discuss there, tease out there. Dr. Poorna Banerjee, I was certainly not talking about angel in the house. What I was talking about is this broad bifurcation of society where the trope is, where the acceptable trope is the angel in the house. But the people were certainly not the angels in the house. They did not aspire to be the angels. They had the courage to deviate from that. So if that's the sense I conveyed to you, then it's my mistake, because that was certainly not the sense that I wanted to convey. I was not talking the angel in the house. Yesterday we were in a very good discussion on Bengal, and there Professor Ranavi Shamadar talked about the Khudro Itihash, the Gouno Itihash. What makes Gouno, or the thing that is not the mainstream? What makes the mainstream the mainstream? What is so main about it? Do the number of people make it mainstream? Certainly not. Certainly not. In fact, the non-mainstream, I wouldn't call them peripheral, is much larger in number. So there is a politics involved there. And I have always worked on the non-mainstream. And I believe that the center has to be redefined. because the mainstream is never the center. It is the center that is imposed on us. We are all part of the non-mainstream, really, but we aspire to be the mainstream. We aspire to be an engineer once we graduate. We aspire to be a doctor, because we know otherwise we'll be the non-mainstream. Just by taking positions in medical or engineering, we don't redefine society. We are just making a turn there by saying that, taking over these professions it might change society, but we cannot break the master's house with the master's tools. We have to think of other tools. We have to invent our tools. Why don't we make, for example, the history of emotion? How many of us have the courage to work on that? We think, in the 18th, 19th century, that was madness. My sister is going to teach her, book in her class, and what happens in a household is that if she watches a movie, you are forced to watch it with her. And yesterday, I told her, my goodness, this is so depressing, I can't watch it. It's called yellow wallpaper. That's the trope. Postpartum depression. All women are supposed to be depressed. If they are, they can very well be. There are reasons for that. So we have to identify that. We have to own our emotions. We have to own our sexuality and not be either glamorized by it or be ashamed of it. So, so definitely not the angel. I'm in fact talking about the devil in the household, the disorderly woman, because that is what I work on. But disorderly is the orderly, really. What makes her disorderly is the understanding of what is order. Control is order. This whole notion of alokhi is the notion of control, where there is a lack of control. Aparna, your question is something which resonates with me a lot, because you see, there are multiple layers to it. One layer is youth, and youth's intention of experimenting. We never understand that even young women need to experiment with sexuality. They need to develop their sexuality. They need to develop, erotica is not a bad thing. All people have it in their lives, so we should celebrate it. But the sad thing is, in a society like ours, we cannot. So these women, of course, falling in love is a way out for them. They run away because they want that liberty. When we do our research, they tell us they are trafficked, because trafficking gives them a legitimacy. They are smart, they know the tropes. Not all, because trafficking is, again, at the end of the day, we think it's heinous, but it is actually, definitely what we call smuggling. People pay somebody to take them from point A to point B. A Burmese woman wants to come to Thailand, but if she's under the age of 35, she needs a man to take her. I have a student in Germany who is an Afghan student. She could not get her visa because German consulate is not there. Lydia knows that very well. It's not there in Kabul. She had to travel to Pakistan for her visa. And she had to cross the border, where the Taliban would not let her go if she was without a man. So she paid a man to tell them that she is the wife of him, whereas her husband was in Germany. So there are these things that need to be done. And women know that trafficking legitimizes their choice of a profession, because this choice is unproductive to the state. This choice doesn't have legitimacy. So there might very well be a huge group who are trafficked, where traffickers do not care about their profit sharing. They're more interested in being harmful to these people, dominating them through sex. So that is there, but also there is the other aspect that they use the stories also. We use narratives that are beneficial to us. Okay, so this is a wonderful field to work in, and you should continue working in. You are a very fine historian. And transgender sex worker, I'll tell you a very interesting story. I'm a storyteller at heart. When Prajok, this NAS Foundation opened this organization called Prajok, and Prajok, nobody wanted to be the president of Prajok because this is for men who have sex with men. So I had a student in the sociology department, and I was a new young lecturer in Calcutta University. He came and told me, Paula Di, you are you do not follow. You're not one of those good girls. So why don't you be our president? Because nobody else is agreeing to be. So I was the first president of Prajok, okay? And then in the newspaper, it was flashed that this organization is working against HIV, and the president of Prajok is Paula Banerjee. And I remember going to my class when one of my colleagues came and said, congratulations for coming out of the closet. For a while, I didn't understand what he's saying. Then I figured, oh, because I was the president of Prajok, automatically I am in that group. So you see, our tolerance is very limited. And even when we try to appear to be progressive, we don't understand the politics of it. So transgender sex workers is a very historical group. For example, we have students of history here. Again, I will bring up a movie, Jodha Akbar. Have you guys seen it? Who was the sort of the security person of the harem? A transgender person. Why? Because male guards can have penetrative sex with these women, and they were not allowed to do that. So transgender people were acceptable there. So historically, we had a lot of respect for transgender people. From the place where I'm teaching now, there is enormous respect of transgender group of people. I have 2 students, but many of them define themselves as she. That is their right. Who wants to be a they? That's so silly, that concept. They can be she, he, she, whatever. It's their right to do that. And we have to tell ourselves that that is not something which we should analyze. And unless we celebrate emotions, we will keep analyzing these nonsense. So, of course, it's a very historical thing. And I can talk to you, my dear, about that when I have a little more time. Okay.
আমি ব্রিফলি জিজ্ঞেস করছি থ্যাংক ইউ ফর দ্য লেকচার ফার্স্টলি আর যেহেতু আই নো মোরালেস আ লট অফ ইউর ওয়ার্ক সো আই কুড অলসো রিলেট টু হোয়াট শি ওয়াজ আস্কিং অ্যান্ড হোয়াট উড বি ইউর আনসার্স আমি যেটা চিন্তা করছিলাম যেহেতু আমি জানি আপনি 50-এর দশক নিয়েও লিখেছেন আর হ্যাঁ যাই হোক আপনার থেকে আমি শিখেছি এবার আপনার লেন্সটা আমি রিলেট করতে পারি বলেই আমার আই এম কিউরিয়াস অন সামথিং যে এই যে ইন্ডিপেন্ডেন্সের জন্য যে নিউ বাইরে যাওয়া মহিলা আর আপনি নিতার এক্সাম্পল দিলেন মহানগরও আছে সো এদের নিয়েও তো একটা সার্টেন পারসেপশন ছিল যে মন্দ মেয়ে খারাপ মেয়ে লিপস্টিক পরছে স্লিভলেস ব্লাউজ অ্যান্ড অল অফ দ্যাট সো আই এম কিউরিয়াস যে যারা but no, that's what my question is. How much would you say a notion ta was broken like Binodini and pre-independence এটার কথা আমি বলছি যেহেতু আপনার স্প্যানটা অনেকটাই pre-independence কে যেটা নিয়ে চলছে তো আমার partition could it contribute in any way significantly in how society perceives women that are now breaking boundaries, that now they are working out, and how much naturalized it was, and whether there was a degree of difference in how mondo me are perceived এখনো যেটা চলছে মানে how much would you say things have actually changed on ground, because I know we have discussed so much in private also how even academia is not out of that, all those tropes are so much there in how we perceive, so it's just like wondering aloud.
কিছুটা তো বদলেছে, পার্টিশনের ফলে কিছুটা তো বদলেছে। ওপার বাংলা থেকে আসা মেয়েরা একটা জিনিস করেছে, সেটা হচ্ছে দেখো ঘরে বাইরেতে রবীন্দ্রনাথের মতো মানুষ যিনি 4 অধ্যায়ে একটা অত্যন্ত লিবারেটিং একটা কনসেপ্ট এনেছেন, তিনিও কিন্তু ঘরে বাইরেতে যে বাইরে যাওয়ার সাহস রাখছে তাকেও কিন্তু একটা লেভেলে ক্রিটিক করছেন। হ্যাঁ, তো কাজেই সেইটা কিন্তু পার্টিশনের পরে হয়েছে। অ্যাংলো ইন্ডিয়ান মেয়েরা নয় বা জুইশ মেয়েরা নয়, বাঙালি মেয়েরা অফিসের মানে গিয়ে স্টেনোগ্রাফার হচ্ছে, বাঙালি মেয়েরা অন্য ধরনের পোশাক পরছে। সেই সময় কিন্তু অনেক সাহস, বাধ্যতামূলকভাবে সেই সাহসটা তারা দেখাতে পেরেছিল, তারা বাধ্য হয়েছিল, একটা বদলও হয়েছিল। কিন্তু আজকে কিন্তু আস্তে আস্তে আমরা ওই ফিরে যাওয়া আবার ফেরা এর দোনামোনায় আটকে রয়েছি। For example, I will tell you, since this is an English department, so I should speak in English, and I have friends who don't understand Bengali. So, when I first became the Vice Chancellor, it's very funny, but somebody, one of my predecessors, who was a female, I will not say Vice Chancellor or Pro-Vice Chancellor, one of the two, she told me, "Ei shon, তুই তোর এবারে স্লিভলেস ব্লাউজগুলো বাদ দে, কটা হাত শুদ্ধ ব্লাউজ কর।" See, you see, and that's not very far off. It was 2017-18. So how much change, how much road have we traversed? Not many people will do that. This woman was much older than me, so that's why she probably could say it. Kintu tomader ekta jinish mone rakho, again movie, my go-to is always a movie. What is that movie where Karishma Kapoor acted as this wife of a Nawab? Zubaida. There, Rekha, who was the first wife, came and said, "My dear, please stop wearing your sleeveless blouses." Isn't that right? I mean, why is sleeveless blouse such a problem in this heat? Or maybe people are very concerned about our tanning. Yeah.
But you did, change your sartorial choices during that time. If I have it
I was forced to.
I remember that as well.
Yeah.
I was forced to. When I first started teaching, I was told, "তুমি শাড়ি পরতে পারো তো?" Because I had just come back from United States and I was thinner at that time. So, "তুমি শাড়ি পরতে পারো তো?" I never asked my faculty members that question, but I was asked. And then I had the Dean of Arts in Calcutta University tell me, "এই যে শিফন শাড়ি পরে পরে তুমি যাও, এতে ছেলেদের অসুবিধা হয়।" তাতে আমার উত্তর ছিল, "স্যার, ছেলেদের তো অসুবিধা হয় না, আপনার হতে পারে।" এগুলো আমরা তো ফেস করেছি, আমাদের জীবনে আমরা অনেক বদল দেখেছি, সেই জন্য আজকে এসে তোমাদের সাথে এই বকবকগুলো করতে পারছি। কিন্তু I am also part of the establishment now. আর ওই যে আমরা শিখেছিলাম কর্তৃপক্ষের কালো হাত গুঁড়িয়ে দাও, সবসময় the thing that becomes mainstream, try to critique that, try to challenge that, because mainstream always draws us back. Don't be afraid to be non-mainstream.
Asking questions is very important. Yes, to the next one.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Anjana. I'm from PG Semester 4, Department of English. So I have a few observations from this entire lecture series and the entire interactions between us, and it makes me, my first question is, why should we adhere to using the term sex work and not prostitution? Because how I see it is sex work really dilutes the horrendous, horrific experiences that the women, transgender people who are employed, under quotes, employed in this profession. My second observation is, when we are coming in face to face with such instances where women are using the excuse of being trafficked to get somewhere else, how can we really say that it is a feat of courage, as much as if we really understand it is the reconditioning, and it is keeping the base that makes patriarchy at the receiving end of all the economic power, of all the dominating power, and it is always exploiting the women who are employed in, women and people from different communities who are employed in this. And my third observation, it's a personal experience. I happen to have a few friends who have to depend on such modes to keep them satiated, to keep them not, to help them survive. So should we not question the very economic base that makes a profession like prostitution legal, but also under the cloak that it is illegal, but it is existing in the peripheries? But why can't we question the system itself that reiterates that the people belonging from an impoverished and very nibrito class backgrounds, they are the ones having to depend on such? Why should such economic professions exist in the first place? Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, I think I will adhere to the politics that you're talking about. I want to foreground the fact that it's work. At the end of the day, it's work. It's legitimate work. I want to legitimize that work, okay? The other thing that I want to say is, trafficking is sometimes horrendous. I have spent 30 years working on it. Sometimes it's just a passage. The horrendous part of it comes with the power of the patriarchy. Okay, people feel they're entitled since they're controlling a body. So, you see, when you are trafficked, it doesn't really matter whether you're a woman or a man or a transgender, you're a body. And there, the power to control that body is the problem there. So it is not just a women's problem, it is a societal problem. Yes, women in prostitution face tremendous impoverishment. Their bodies, their profession is a body contact profession. So their harm is on their body. But women activists in Northeast or in Kashmir, is not their lives horrendous? Dalit women, are not their lives horrendous? So why do we valorize this? What we have to say is that any disrespect for any body is something that needs to be stopped. One of our problem is we try to glamorize erotica. And that is why the focus becomes completely skewed. The focus has to be on violence. But that does not privilege any group. Because women from Dalit communities face enormous violence. The Bhangis who are working on waste, the people who are working, who are rag pickers. I know a lot of sex workers who say, I would rather be a sex worker than a rag picker. I would rather be a sex worker than a person who collects medical waste. Imagine what these women, 70% of the people working in medical waste are women. So no reason to valorize anybody. We have to face that this violence on female body, on transgender body, because the norm is the male body. The mainstream is the male body. Any deviance from that is always acted upon with tremendous violence. So I critique violence. I do not privilege any sections of the society. Those who are responsible or those who are faced with that violence, whether, they are men or women, they're all part of this gender pole, where, a Borno Hindu man from a rich background would seldom face violence. So the critique that I do is of violence. Because I have seen that the ill effects of critiquing any specific group, because that always turns on its head. So if a woman, I work quite a bit with plantation workers. There was this 17-year-old girl, and this happened last year. I am, a member of an NGO, a board member of an NGO that works with plantation workers a lot. And there was this woman who was planning her daughter going to another city to work, and she was a 17-year-old girl. And the mother was fairly educated in that sector. She had done some schooling. So I went up to her and I said, "Tumi jano, tomar meyer koto problem hote pare? Tumi je encourage korcho oke, o je khushi hoye jacche." Meyta clearly bolche je amar hate to 2-4 taka ashbe, this cash that gives me power. And then the mother looked at me and said, "Apnar meye thakle to apni Americaয় পাঠাতেন, আমার মেয়েকে আমি পাঠাবো না কেন?" So, if mobility is associated with progress in their experience, who am I to say that that doesn't happen? And for that matter, do you think all these people who are trafficked and duped into it are stupid? I give them agency. They have the agency to do what they feel they need to do to survive. And they have the strength to bear that violence. So we have to critique violence, not any particular format of it.
Thank you.
The University of Oldenburg in Germany, and I would like to connect this last slide with the situation in Germany, because about 10 or 15 years ago we had a large legal change regarding decriminalization and legal protection of prostitutes. That also came with integrating them into healthcare and social security. In many German cities we have urban planning with the right to the city in that sense that there is red light districts and so on. So one could say Germany followed a number of those recommendations, and there was rethinking of policy, to some extent also of social perception. But there is quite an understanding nowadays what that did was to make Germany the brothel of Europe. Because very few prostitutes actually went into jobs with social security and healthcare and so on, but the power relations in the field, and again the violence, saw to it that all this played into the hands of the, what is it in English, the men who exploit women sex workers and the people who own the brothels, the pimps, yeah. But sometimes it's also madams and so on. So it is the power relations in the field that with the decriminalization, legal protection and all that were not changed, and so what has happened is, as many, especially Nordic countries, criminalize prostitution in the sense that those who are criminals are not the women, but it is the customers. That act is illegal. So that is what a lot of the Nordic countries, I think also France, various countries around Germany did, and that reduced prostitution to quite an extent. And the flip side of that is Germany, with this different approach, experiences that prostitution, sex work is growing, and I would claim the exploitation connected with that and the violence connected with that is also growing. So I do think we would need more advanced political tools. I don't exactly know what they are, but this was just, I don't know if you've looked into this European discourse or the European experiences, but yeah. And one other dimension, if I follow the discourse correctly in the German context, and that seems to be a European context, is that social media and also the wide use of pornography has changed the sex work considerably, and also in many respects to the disadvantage of the women in the field. And so that is another dimension of the power relations that seem to harm, not exclusively, but in very many respects seem to harm women sex workers. Thank you.
It's not exactly a question, but because you just pointed out about Dalit women and also that dimension, I was also thinking a lot of debate and discourse here, I mean, in the Bengal has been about sex work and prostitution in the history of sex work, is very much looking at the poor woman. But the other social identities of women, whether it's caste, ethnicity, religion, is always missed out or has been missed out till now. Maybe right now there are more writings about it. Since I've also worked in Maharashtra and with Sangram as an organization in Maharashtra, Sangli, and there has been historically a big debate within the women's movement about like sex work being caste-based work and temple prostitution and etc. and a very, very furious, tense debates between Dalit Bahujan feminists and autonomous women's collectives about this sex work. And it's very interesting, and it also complicates and problematizes this entire discourse and the lived and the knowledge about the lived realities of women. So I would just like to you to comment a little bit maybe on that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a 1 hour lecture or a 1.5 hour lecture can only talk about the middle trope, you know. The rest that actually defines the field is something that comes out only when we are writing. So right now, if I talk about the others, the gongno within the discourse, you know, what about women who visit or lives in the Karnani mansions? What kind of violence do they face? You know, the thing is, the reason why we concentrate as feminists on the poorer, the lower class, the lower caste segment, because all of these come together. You know, I think you already know my disquiet with the term intersectionality. I think intersectionality is a term that only defines the weak, the vulnerable. It is not a term that is empowering. So anyway, that's a different discussion. So, you know, if I try to talk about the complexity within the movement itself or the work itself, then we will not come to any understanding of it. Because, you know, the field is very variegated. Every woman, every sex worker presents her own story, her own narrative, her own reality. But to understand one of the major problems that comes with the terrain is to try to understand what makes them particularly vulnerable. And I was holding this axis of vulnerability when I was discussing it. I'm not unaware of the other areas, but whenever as feminists we talk about women's problems, women's movement, we inevitably swerve towards the middle class women. Whether we are working on autonomous women's movement, legal reforms, or whatever. So that is why I try to concentrate on the lowest common denominator and try to talk about those realities. And I never claim that there are no other realities. My discourse is all about multiple realities. My discourse is all about multiplicity of dialogues, of multi-logs. And I think the only connection that we have to women's movement and of women who are into sex work is this whole trajectory of violence. So that is why that was my sort of access point.
Thank you, ma'am. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience listening to you. Also, thank you for patiently answering each and every query. What I would quickly round up with is, it is so crucial because ma'am started with rewriting the archive. She spoke about rewriting the archive, and Binodini in her autobiography starts by saying that ke porbe amar kotha ke porbe, and she says that ami jake bolechilam she bollo je tomar সবকিছু দায়িত্ব যখন আমি নিয়েছি তোমার এই পাগলামির কালো আঁচড়গুলির দায়িত্ব আমার. So that's how her writing was referred to, the mad black scrolls. So I'm so glad we are talking about her, we are talking about the other, all these women who belong to the city but could never own it. So thank you, ma'am, for this wonderfully insightful lecture. I would now call upon the stage Madhubanti Bhui, my colleague, and she'll deliver the vote of thanks.
I'm here to deliver the vote of thanks. First of all, I would like to say that well-behaved women never make history. And on this note, I would like to thank our esteemed speaker, Professor Paula Banerjee, who delivered a wonderful, enlightening lecture on the topic Sex Workers, Migrant Citizens, the Making of Kallolini, Kolkata. On behalf of the Department of English, I would like to thank CRG, Calcutta Research Group, and CIFAR for organizing this. They have been organizing a lecture series for some time now. Congratulations to them. And I would also like to thank our Honorable Officer in Charge, Dr. Anushila Hajar Bhattacharya, and also our students who are present here, and the wonderful audience, and also our esteemed guests today. We have associate professors and assistant professors from other colleges and universities here with us, and we have in the audience many research scholars from esteemed universities and institutions from all over the world. And we have foreign guests also. So I would like to thank all of them for being present here today and for your wonderful questions and your participation. And I would like to thank PWD and also Gopal Da, Shankar Da, and Bashanti. Thank you. Am I missing anyone? Okay. So, yes, tea is being served outside. So I will request all of you to have some tea and have some talk also. Thank you very much.